car here in Chattanooga. Here in Chattanooga and Helmand County. Small is better than big and simple than complex. And in the footnotes, at 5-point type in Helvetica font, Helvetica or Geneva font. I like the Swiss variety because they don't have the little serif on certain letters. The serifs, when that type is used by government, they use New York type and Roman, because the serif are the blades that their words have. Their words are always cutting people and compelling and coercing and threatening and bullying people. I prefer the neutral font that has no blades on it at all. Serif-free, blade-free font. David Toulis, Love Your Neighbor by Local, the blogger with the biggest pen, the blogger who uses footnotes, right? And I'm glad you're giving me just a minute of your time here on the David Toulis Show at 927 Nooga Radio. The number is 800-8949. Keep that number handy, 800-8949. Now, when a state trooper who's harassing the good people of Prince Edward County in Virginia comes to has a checkpoint, and he comes up to the window and says, "You must show me your driver's license, or I'm going to break your window and drag you out from behind your car and molest you, injure you, bloody you, and scrape you, and handcuff you, and charge you." Is he operating according to the statute, and is he operating according to his own rules, which John Lehman, in an aggressive defense of his own rights, has found say that the trooper must request. The trooper must request a driver license at a checkpoint. In other words, he can't not ask that question, but it is a request. Is that right, John Lehman, that the trooper at the checkpoint in which you were arrested earlier this year, was he under a duty to request that license from you, John?
Yes, it's very clear. When we FOIA'd their documents, their training manuals, their procedures and policies for a checkpoint, like number 4, number 5, they must request the driver's license and registration. It is a request, though, not a demand, and that's where they go wrong.
So what happened? They did more than request this fine gentleman?
Yes, they requested for 15 minutes. I told him to get his supervisor out. He came out. They had a discussion. They were saying he must identify, he must identify, he must identify. Supervisor comes around. They request again and again and again. And I tell them, quite frankly, the Supreme Court says that I don't have to answer you, and I'm not going to in a polite way. And I know my rights, and you don't have the right to do this. You can ask me 3 questions, and you've got to let me go. And he says, well, that's not going to happen. We're going to put you in handcuffs. I said, you shouldn't do that. It wouldn't be proper. And he indicated for the original officer to break my window out, and they did, and they put me in handcuffs and took me to jail.
Did you have any blood or injuries, John, in that abusive encounter?
No, just glass flew all, across my face and all over the car. But no, they didn't actually molest me. They did put me in handcuffs, and they did drag me across the street and put me in the car. And of course, while they were dragging me across the street, quite forcefully, not dragging on the ground, but, pushing you, he said, you have the right to remain silent. Being you like to talk about your rights, you have the right to remain silent. Very first thing he said. Very, very oxymoronic that I've been exercising that right, and then all of a sudden I get the right.
You mean they're Mirandizing you? So what you're saying is that even though my listener, John, here in Chattanooga area is not Mirandized, he should Mirandize himself, apparently, as you did, right?
The Constitution is very clear. You have the right not to incriminate yourself. That's at all times.
And so you don't have to. Let me ask you this: you understood correctly that the moment that checkpoint came into view, or the moment in an alternative setting where there's the blue light behind you, you understand that you are under arrest, right? If you're not free to leave, you are under arrest, and that means at that point, at that moment, you should zip your lip and not be afraid, and simply say, I say nothing, and I give nothing. And you should also realize, you, my listener, that when you give a document, you are testifying.
That is correct. Yeah, I knew directly. That's why I picked up my phone, called my wife, rolled the window up to 2 inches down, and so that I could actually talk to them, but yet not have, them say that I reached out or did anything to them, and for my protection too. So yes, I said I had the right not to, over and over and over again, and of course they just disregard that. So,
well, what is the accusation that you will make against them when the tort action comes? They were informed that you were invoking and asserting and defending your constitutional rights in your state, which are very much like ours. What have they done? What have they done injurious to you? What's the injury, the tort, if you will, John Lehman?
Well, the tort is they broke out my wife's window of my wife's car, and they towed it. In Virginia law, you can't tow a vehicle that someone is in if it belongs to someone else. Any percentage belongs to anyone else, they can't tow it. So they broke the window, they towed it, which costs, I had to pay a tow yard. And in their own code, their own regulations, it says they're supposed to push it off the road, and they're trained to do that, or they're supposed to take it to a police impound where it's free to get, where it doesn't cost any money to go get it back. But yet they do that on purpose, make you pay $300-400 for the tow bill and, of course, the broken window. And then they put me in handcuffs overnight. So I'm in for part of one day and part of the next. So it's very inconvenient. And
humiliating.
The jailers actually work with the police department here to coerce you to get you to fold your position. They do that on purpose. I've heard an officer encourage the jailer to do such a thing.
I didn't quite get that. Can you repeat, please?
Yes, there's a private jail here, Piedmont Regional Jail, and the various officers encourage the jailers to torture you, to inflict damage and harm upon you, to get answers that they want answers to. They're cooperating in racketeering with the local and state police. That is my experience more than once.
You were convicted in the lower court, in the walk-in, the court, the juryless corporation court, John Lehman in Prospect, Virginia. You're in Prince Edward County. You have a trial de novo set for circuit court with a jury of 7, kind of denuded jury system in your state. And one of the charges is that you were driving on suspended. Now, I guess part one of driving on suspended as a charge or driving on revoked is this. Were you driving? Can you tell my listener that driving is something that the state is going to have to prove in your case? You are a contractor and a remodeler and a builder. Were you driving, John?
No, I wasn't driving according to the United States code and neither the Virginia code. But that's quite a separate issue from what really they're saying I'm driving on a suspended license, and the first thing you have to have had to be driving on a suspended license is a license. And the prosecutor told me last time it's clear you've never had a Virginia license. So you cannot make up a charge of driving on a suspended license if you've never had a Virginia driver's license.
Well, okay, so all right, so that point one. All right, what's the second point? Were you driving that day when you were arrested?
No, I wasn't driving. I mean, I was using the public right of way, and that's why they call it a right of way, because you have the right to use it. Everyone has the free right to use it in the ordinary course of business and personal use. You just can't use it in the extraordinary sense for hire, for profit for hire. So if I was hauling goods or passengers for hire, that's the extraordinary use of the highway. I need to have either a driver's license or an operator's license, one or the other. That would be correct. But I was in no capacity doing such a thing.
Did the officer try to establish that you were involved in commerce by demanding contracts or evidence of cargo, or did he look in the back and see if there were any passengers who were paying you to be there as part of his investigation?
Well, I mean, they're clearly instructed to look for weapons and drugs and alcohol, according to their own training manual. So whatever else he was looking for, I have no idea. But I've never had an officer, one I've ever asked the question, am I in commerce? Do you have any evidence I'm in commerce? And they've always said, well, no. Of course, they don't understand what I'm asking, but I ask it on purpose anyway. But, but the courts, the judges in the lower courts, they don't care anyway. They're just a rubber stamp for the prosecutor to make money. It's only about the money and control.
Well, this is David Toulis, and I'm the author of what's called Transportation Administrative Notice here in Chattanooga, East Ridge. I gave administrative notice last week to the city attorney of Red Bank. And what I'm doing in that document, which is a 20-page legal analysis and a lot of single-space type, is to explain that there is a distinction between travel and transportation. Transportation is a category of travel. And I think, John Lehman, you're exactly right. Transportation is the for-profit use. And let me ask you why it's reasonable that it's extraordinary. People who run, let's say, a trucking business or an ambulance service or wrecker service, they are, how is it that their use is extraordinary? But my listener who's just in his sedan or his family van, minivan, how is that just routine and ordinary? What's the difference?
Well, yes, everyone who owns land, or they call it property now, has given up, deeded part of their land to be used for the public right-of-way. So if I own 5 acres and there's 100-foot of road frontage here, I have given up, say, 20 foot of my land so that everyone that wants to use that highway gets the free access to the highway with no charge from me. And my neighbor has done the same thing, so he doesn't charge me, and that neighbor all the way to your house. No one charges anyone to use the highway. But when it comes to extraordinary use, the Supreme Court has said that the trucking companies and people that are carrying passengers for hire, that's the extraordinary use, and it isn't ordinary. So because of the various things that people carry, and your office is for profit on the highway specifically, then you are regulated and no one else is.
And that's, well, why is that reasonable that someone using the road for profit is regulated? What's the rationale behind that?
Well, if you take a 300,000-pound load down the highway and crush all the roads, all the infrastructure that we've all paid for, and the gasoline tax and such, that you need to be regulated so you don't tear up everything in sight, because just because you have the equipment and the capacity to carry the load doesn't mean you should. And if you do, you have to pay extra to fix those roads, and that's what all the fees and things for commercial trucking is all about. Because the semis tear up the roads much more than a 2,000 to 4,000 pound vehicle. 80,000 pounds is a lot, so that's why they're more regulated.
So my listener who may sympathize with a private car stopped by a trooper, you're suggesting maybe should not sympathize with an 18-wheeler pulled over on the highway with the blue light trooper behind him. And the reason for that would be that trooper is really doing his job in that case, because the 18-wheeler, well, let me ask you this. Does an 18-wheeler impose certain risks to others on the road in addition to damaging bridges and making potholes bigger, John Lehman?
Well, sure he does. And I wouldn't want, semis from Mexico to have no inspections at all coming into America and driving all over and not being regulated. So yeah, there's a reason for certain regulations. We're not anti-government. We're not anti-regulation at all. But the Supreme Court has even said the regulations are for a specific type of transportation, not for the private use.
And also, when you say private use, think about this, John Lehman. My listener, who's let's say my listener is a hardworking bricklayer from Guatemala with his children here and his maybe a brother or two, maybe an aunt living in East Ridge. That man is exercising rights that he came here for. He came to Tennessee, to the United States, so he could have freedom of worship, to be free from fear. And when he's on the road in his private capacity, again, apart from the Tennessee licensing scheme, he's exercising a right which really can't be taxed. So if he's going to church, let's say he's going to the Pentecostal church, he's free to do that apart from state permission. And it sounds like what you're saying is that if we have a right to worship, or a right, let's say, to vote, which of course is just a privilege, or let's say the right of free assembly, the right to bear arms, then to exercise those rights, we should be able to move about at liberty without having state permission or pay any kind of fee or tax for the use of that road or the use of the means to get there, right? So if we're exercising the right to worship, I have a right to go to church without permission, which means, John Lehman of Prospect, Virginia, that I really have a right to go there without anybody's magic card in my billfold.
Yes, that is correct. A right cannot be converted into to a crime. So the exercise of a right, you cannot say I'm committing a crime just because I'm exercising my right. And that's exactly what they have done several times to me, and I've had enough. And so now I'm going to sue them, and that's why when I went into court last, they gave me no active jail time, no fine, and no court costs. That's my belief. They want me to go away and not sue them, but that's not going to happen.
Well, they're prosecuting you, it seems, still in the next court in the criminal matter, John Lehman, so you haven't gotten rid of them yet.
No, but that's not the point at present. The point is it's going to cost them a lot to continue prosecuting. It's going to cost them a lot because I'm willing to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court over this issue because in Virginia, you cannot get proper discovery according to the rules of law because they have thrown basically the law book out and instead inserted their legal mumbo-jumbo, which Mickey's jurisprudence on the law says you have the right to discovery ahead of trial, and they're trying to limit my right of discovery. They already have. I tried to subpoena the 3 officers, and they rejected that out of hand. The prosecutor did, and then the judge did. And I didn't ask permission. I just went ahead and subpoenaed them, and they blocked it. So it's just racketeering on a massive scale to keep you from law, God's law in particular, but they want you to stay in the legal realm and get out of the law realm. That's all they're trying to do.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and I want my listener to make note of Constance Giles in Whitfield County, just south of Chattanooga, who's doing the same thing. She's doing exactly what you're doing, John Lehman, demanding evidence, demanding the whole body of data from the state in an obstruction case, willful obstruction. She was fool enough, if you will, to call 911, and the deputies arrested her after she called for police help in a house full of daughters of 2 strangers in the building to repossess the motorcycle of her husband, the plumber, the plumber in Whitfield County. And she says, I'm not going to the first hearing without knowing how I should plead. If it's a preliminary hearing, how do you know how to plead unless you have all the evidence against you? So people usually, especially if they don't have an attorney, they enter with nothing in their head and nothing in hand about the case against them so that they can make a proper plea of either not guilty or stand me on the plea or guilty. They don't know. And so she's doing exactly the right thing. So I think, John Lehman, I think you're kind of a model for people like her here. And you're saying, let's get this right. You do not have an attorney. Is that right? You're not represented by a lawyer, John Lehman?
That is correct. Most lawyers, not all, but most lawyers are lying lawyers, and I don't trust them with a 1,000-foot pole. I have met 3 in my entire life that seem to be very honest and upright and trying to do the right thing, but most are not.
And you're doing this work largely on your own. And do you have encouragement from friends? How do you maintain moral support, John Lehman, in your case?
Well, I do have my family support. It took some years to finally get that. They thought I was kind of out in left field at first. Now they're realizing, no, you're spot on. You're right. You have them on the run, especially when the officers, I was asking them questions in court, and there were people in the audience that were smiling, and they were saying, wow, they're really squirming really bad. We've never seen a judge and state trooper squirm so much. So I'm doing it on my own, but I do have help because there's plenty of information on the internet. There's plenty of people who love law. They love America. They want America to prosper, and they realize that lying lawyers have brought us to this place. And because of our apathy and our lack of action, we are here now. And if we don't do something, our children and grandchildren will not have a future. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because God called me to do it.
Well, you're right, John Lehman. God does call you to do it, and he calls you, my listener, also to stand your ground. And that's what I'm here for. I'm here on the David Tula Show to encourage you to be a prosperous and courageous man and not live in fear. If everybody lives in fear, these troopers, these state cops, these city cops, these sheriff's deputies, they will do whatever they want. If they get no resistance, they'll be emboldened to harass and damage and lie even more. And so what you're doing, John, is making them go to trial. You're demanding trial, and all their misdeeds, all their gang-related activity will come into the open. And so my listener, I just encourage you to take heart here. Constance Giles is an example. Hanson Melvin, a couple years ago, we covered his case extensively and gave him the kind of courage just by my talking to him and by interviewing him, asking him, just discussing his rights. He demanded an indictment. It was found that the cop lied about him. Though we must say this, Neil Pinkston, the district attorney in Howland County, knew that was a crime committed against Hanson Melvin, and yet he let the cop go without being prosecuted. He did not prosecute a state actor crime, and that should be held against him. Neil Pinkston should not be reelected. He should not be reelected. John Lehman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with John Lehman. A heartening conversation, a bracing, encouraging word from a man who loves God, evidently, loves his liberties. And my show is every day at 1 o'clock. Do tell a friend about me. Raise my ratings by 100% by telling a friend. Then I'll have you and that friend as my listeners. That's 2. And the 3 of us, we will change the world. David Toulis, Nooga Radio.
3, 2, 1.
Chatter Nooga Radio. Digital FM 90.